Hello, fellow alchemists. Welcome back to our series on the Elixir programming language. Today we're going to be talking about lists. Now, lists are quite important in all kinds of programming languages, but especially in functional programming languages like Elixir. And we're going to do a very quick dive into it. So let's go ahead and let's get started. They hold a collection of data. Underneath, all they are is just an element of any kind of data type, like I said before. And then there's actually a pointer to the next item in the list. And at the end of the list is going to be an empty list. We're going to walk through that. And also, what I want to say too about lists is that lists are very, very efficient to prepend items to the head of the list. And what I'm going to say is that lists can be divided into the head, which is the element, and the tail, which is the rest of the list. And you can only go from the head or the beginning of a list to the end. And I'm going to also show you how that is. And like I've just mentioned before, they're very efficient to get the first item, or what we call the head in the list, but they're not efficient to get the very last item. And because of this, they're very inefficient when you try to find a specific item within that list, because you have to literally go through from the beginning to the end until you find that item. And when a new item is prepended to a list, they're very, very efficient in the fact that they keep the original list that was already there, and they just add another item to it and point the head to there. So it's actually quite efficient to build up a list. Now, the reason that lists are used quite commonly in Elixir and other functional programming languages is that they're very easy to recurse through, because you just go through the beginning, the head of the list, all the way to the end. And the nice part is that sometimes when you go through a list, you want to actually get the reverse of that. And there's already something called a BIF, which is a built-in function, which can do that for you. It's written in C, so it makes it very, very fast. And you just use that just to reverse the order of that list. So let's go ahead, let's do some examples. Okay, so this is our existing code base, and we did some pattern matching before. And when you want to iterate through a list, you can actually easily do this with some pattern matching. The first thing, I kind of want to introduce you a little bit to a list itself. Okay, so we have a list, and let's say we have an element 1 inside. So this is just a simple list. You see, just a number 1 inside. And if we want to actually deconstruct that list, now what we need to do is we need to get that element, and then, what we can actually do is we can use the terms, right? So we get the head of that element and the tail, and we use this deconstructor over here, which will actually split the list between head and tail. And you see the head of that list is the element, and the tail of the list is going to be an empty list. So every time you iterate through, this is what you get, is you get the head being that element, as long as you pattern match to the beginning of that list and the end, and inside of there, the tail is just going to be the empty list when you have a list that size. But if we have a much bigger list, say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we try to get the head and tail again, you'll see now the head is still the first item in that list, and the tail is the rest of the list. So when we actually create this, we're actually doing something like this. We're actually doing 1, 2, gets a little bit out of place. We're doing something like this. If we had a list like this, this should work. They're exactly the same. Otherwise, this would fail. So you see, the list of 1, 2 is actually the list of 1, the element 1 being prepended to the list of just element 2. It's a little bit complicated, but knowing these basic things, you can actually iterate through a list quite quickly. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a file. Let's just call it lists. It's a series lists. And we can create a function called count, which will count the elements of that list. And we can create a private function called list, and it takes the accumulator. I'll show you how this works. So all list is going to do, it's going to call that private function, passing the list and the accumulator of 0. Now what we do over here is all we need to do is actually we split this into head, tail, and we call count again. We don't need the head. We put the tail in here because the tail will be the rest of the list. And then we'll take the accumulator and we'll add 1 to it. So we're just going to count the number of items. And then we need to use pattern match to actually stop counting. So when we finally pass in an empty list, we have the accumulator, and we just return that. So what's going to happen is it's going to come in here with the list, start with 0, because it could be an empty list size, right? So if we passed an empty list, 0 will get returned. Otherwise, if there's something inside, we get rid of the head, we grab the tail, we pump it into here, we take the accumulator, we put that into here, and we add 1 to it because we know we already have a head element over here. And it should work quite nicely. We can test it out very simply. We can count an empty list, size of 0, cool. We can count one with 4 elements inside, and everything works quite quickly. So this is how a list works. We're going to go over some other data types in future series, but this is a very, very powerful type of data type, and you can see how useful it can be. So again, this is Alan from Plangora. This has been our series on Elixir. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.